Hey everybody, Michael Crump here, and I wanted to briefly talk about all of this latest and greatest PlayStation 4 custom firmware talk that is going on absolutely everywhere. So, I brought up a couple of sites that may help us in this, but basically, Control Execute over on Twitter, he had made a mention to having these certain types of access to these beep codes. So we can go into one of these buzzers and let's just go ahead and maximize that. Basically, he's able to run these commands with this application called Jailbreak. And this, by the way, this application has been around for a number of years. And by running this, he's able to give commands like turn on or activate a buzzer. And you'll see throughout this, there's a number of different commands that he gives for buzzer 1. I think there's the buzzer 2 in here. Let's let that one play. Let's see if you can hear it. Okay, I don't know if you can hear that or not. But anyway, those are some of the beeps that we get with the PlayStation 4. So anyway, there was a couple of posts on this, and then later on, it was, okay, we will be talking about this EMC custom firmware. Now, that's the key point here, and that is EMC custom firmware. So back over here, you'll start to see that right now there's been files that have been released. And it states in there, it says, hey, we've had some interesting developments with the PlayStation 5's firmware. They've dropped news that there is a new tutorial that's quite interesting. Basically, you get the ability for a custom firmware in the SouthBridge EMC that acts like a second syscon. Now, this whole concept of syscon, this goes back quite some time, but I've even created videos on the PlayStation 3 syscon where I hooked it up using these UART adapters. I've got a number of these right now, and this is the same exact chip that, or the same exact board that they're using for the PlayStation 4. So what syscon does in general is that it is a diagnostics tool. So it's a tool that you can get information about what's going on with the PlayStation. So in the PlayStation 3 scene, it was used a lot of the times, or when it came out, at least when I used it, I was able to troubleshoot and I was able to fix some of the PlayStation 3 systems because I was able to get the actual codes of what was going wrong with the system. So you could look up those codes. What this is that this is going to be that ability to get that same sort of commands that you already, may or may not have a use for on your PlayStation 4. So let's continue reading a little bit through this. It says this works on firmware up to 9.03. And for the most part, this will probably work with every firmware that's ever released with the PlayStation 4. There's been some other information that I have read that states that this should work forever. It says here, this only grants permanence over the SouthBridge and syscon, but it does not grant permanence over the SAMU. It's just over the SouthBridge and syscon. You can think of it as a second syscon. So in layman's term, this is not your traditional PSP or PS3 custom firmware. And that's what's really important right here is that with this, you're not going to get your permanent firmware where you immediately boot up your PlayStation and your custom firmware all the way, meaning you've got debug menus. There's no more such thing as like gold in. Maybe you can go ahead and fill it with a whole pile of payloads and things like that. That's not what this is going to do, and that's not how this is going to help you. It says here, continuing on, it says here, but rather a firmware for the EMC chip, not the actual PlayStation 4's firmware. So don't confuse the two. It says the CFW for EMC, which EMC is again the key, will allow for various things like making the console beep, changing temperature limits, increasing or decreasing fan speeds, etc. So first off, I really hope that this kind of this kind of puts kind of an end to a lot of the, what is this custom firmware? What is this thing doing? And you can tell for yourself, is this something that you think is interesting that you would like to do? Now, there is a couple of methods. So there is, if you want to do this, you can use, these things such as the hardware, this hardware flasher. So the UART device that they're talking to is this one right here, which is a CP2102. And you basically get these little cables. And I have one of the cables just already attached. It's the same exact thing that's in that image there. This is obviously connected directly to the board. And then this point right here, you would basically solder onto the motherboard. So there is the hardware version. Now, the hardware version is for any system that is in existence as far as the firmware goes. So it could be all the way up to 9.03. And if you solder a chip like this or solder the pins to your motherboard in these very specific places, well, then you have access to using custom firmware version, being able to do things like making the console beep, changing temperature limits, or increasing and decreasing fan speed. So a couple of different things there. Now, there is the hardware version, but then there is also a software version. So if you have a 5.05 hackable CUH 1000 and a CUH 1100 only, well, then you can use this software method right here. And so there's a couple of different steps here. Obviously, it's like FTPing some files, bringing them back, and waiting at least 5 minutes. There's a couple of instructions that's in here in case you want to do that. What is also a bit important that I wanted to call out is that if you do either the hardware method or you do the software method, which was for the 5.05s and those two specific models, here is a list of some of the commands that you can do. Now, some of these commands are things like halt, there's help menus. Some of these I have absolutely no clue what they do, like power SW, reset SDK version that you're currently running on. And there are some of the temperature related stuff. But yeah, you can kind of go through here and you can kind of see, here are just some of the commands that it does. There is a couple of places that you can go and you can like look those up. But for the most part, back over here, what this is talking about, this is really what you're getting out of this. You're getting the ability to make the console beep, change temperature limits, increase, decrease fan speed, and not much more than that. So this is not necessarily the custom firmware that we all thought that we may be getting, but this is more along the lines of a custom firmware that gives us, again, like this access to another syscon. So anyway, there is an absolute ton of information that's still out there. I'm just going to head back over to this blog post. This one was really well written. And in this, there's obviously a couple of the different, hints and tips on how to set this up with the hardware that I just mentioned. And then there is the steps here for the software method. And then there is just a bunch of different videos that goes along with this. So yeah, this is the tweet that I just mentioned that talks about, this was a short video of the several beep modes that's available. Works on all firmwares as long as you have CUH or CUH 1100. And you can tell which version you've got simply by looking at the back of your PlayStation 5. For the most part, for these models right here, these were the launch models. So this also doesn't include things that would be such as any of the Slim models. So if you've got a PS4 Slim, it wouldn't work. If you've got a PS4 Pro, it also wouldn't work. So anyway, I just thought that I would make a super quick video of this, and hopefully this helps someone out there. Greatly appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Michael out!